The radio crackled with desperation at 3:47 hours, cutting through the pre-dawn darkness over Helmand Province like a blade through silk. Broken arrow, this is Neptune 6-1. We are danger close, repeat danger close. Enemy forces overrunning our position. The voice belonged to Lieutenant Commander Marcus Diesel Rodriguez, SEAL Team 6, but even his legendary composure couldn't mask the edge of panic bleeding through the static. At Bagram Air Base, Captain Cassandra Reaper Volkov felt her pulse quicken as she monitored the emergency frequency. The call signs were wrong, the coordinates didn't match any scheduled operations, and according to her tactical display, there shouldn't be any friendly forces in that grid square. Yet the desperation in that voice was unmistakably real. Something had gone catastrophically wrong in the Afghan mountains, and whatever was happening, it was happening fast. The mystery deepened when her commanding officer, Colonel James Hammer Patterson, burst into the operations center with an expression she'd never seen before, something between fury and terror. "Volkov, suit up. We've got a black op gone sideways, and you're the only pilot qualified for what they're asking." His weathered face, scarred from 3 tours in Iraq, looked like it had aged a decade in the past 10 minutes. But there was a problem. The coordinates Neptune 6-1 was transmitting placed them in a valley so narrow, so treacherous, that even helicopter insertion was considered near impossible. The terrain was a jagged maze of limestone cliffs and ancient river cuts, where the margin for error measured in inches, not feet. Most pilots wouldn't even attempt a gun run in such conditions. Most pilots weren't Cassandra Volkov. As she strapped herself into the cockpit of her A-10 Thunderbolt II, call sign Hog 17, Cassandra reflected on the cruel irony of her situation. For 18 months, she'd endured the subtle dismissals, the questioning glances, the whispered doubts about whether a woman, especially one barely 5'4" with ash-blonde hair and pale green eyes, could handle the brutal realities of close air support. They called her princess, behind her back, sometimes to her face, always with that patronizing smile that suggested she was playing dress-up in a man's world. Tonight, those same men who'd questioned her competence were counting on her to pull their elite operators out of hell itself. The enemy, still unidentified, still unknown, had managed to corner some of America's most elite warriors in terrain so hostile it seemed designed by nature to kill anything that entered it. And the only thing standing between Neptune 6-1 and complete annihilation was a woman they dismissed as a diversity hire. The Reaper was about to show them exactly what she was made of. Radio chatter exploded across multiple frequencies as Cassandra taxied toward the runway. Intelligence was fragmentary, contradictory, and deeply unsettling. Neptune 6-1 had been conducting a classified operation to capture or eliminate a high-value target when they'd walked into what appeared to be a carefully orchestrated ambush. The enemy force was estimated at over 200 fighters, heavily armed, and positioned with military precision that suggested professional training. Hog 17 Tower, you're cleared for immediate departure, Vector 270, climb and maintain Angels 15, came the crisp voice of the air traffic controller. But even he couldn't hide the tension. Everyone at Bagram knew this wasn't a routine close air support mission. This was a Hail Mary pass with American lives hanging in the balance. As her twin turbofans spooled up to full power, Cassandra ran through her mental checklist one final time. 30mm GAU-8 Avenger cannon loaded with 1,174 rounds of depleted uranium shells. 6 AGM-65 Maverick missiles locked and loaded. 2,000 pounds of mixed ordnance including cluster bombs and high-explosive rockets. Everything she'd need to turn a mountainside into a moonscape. The A-10 thundered down the runway, its distinctive roar echoing off the control tower as 43,000 pounds of titanium-armored death machine lifted into the star-drunk sky. Behind her, the lights of Bagram faded into memory. Ahead lay the Hindu Kush Mountains, their peaks shrouded in clouds that looked like funeral shrouds in the moonlight. Neptune 6-1, this is Hog 17 inbound your position. ETA 12 minutes. Can you give me a sitrep? Cassandra's voice cut through the radio static with professional calm, though her heart was hammering against her ribs like a caged bird. The response came back fragmented, punctuated by the distinctive crack of rifle fire and the deeper boom of RPG explosions. Hog 1-7, taking heavy fire from all sides. At least 200 enemy combatants. They've got us pinned in a canyon. Can't see a way out. Cassandra adjusted her heading slightly, the GPS coordinates leading her toward a section of mountains that looked like the surface of an alien planet on her night vision display. Jagged ridgelines stretched in every direction, carved by millennia of wind and water into formations that seemed to defy physics. Flying close air support in this terrain would be like performing surgery with a chainsaw while riding a roller coaster. But that's exactly what Neptune 6-1 needed her to do. Neptune 6-1, I need you to mark your position with infrared strobes if you've got them. I'm coming in hot, but this terrain is going to make target identification tricky. Cassandra's training kicked in, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was attempting. She'd trained for scenarios like this at Nellie's Air Force Base, but training and reality were separated by a chasm as wide as the one she was about to fly into. The radio crackled back with Rodriguez's voice, now hoarse with exhaustion and combat stress. Hog 1-7, be advised, enemy has shoulder-fired SAMs. We've counted at least 3 Stinger launches in the past 20 minutes. They're waiting for air support. Surface-to-air missiles, in terrain that barely allowed room to maneuver, against an enemy that had somehow anticipated their need for close air support and prepared accordingly. Cassandra felt her mouth go dry, but her hands remained steady on the controls. This was what she'd trained for, what she'd dreamed about since she was 8 years old watching thunderbirds scream across the Nevada sky. This was her moment to prove that competence had nothing to do with gender, and everything to do with skill, courage, and the willingness to fly into hell for your brothers in arms. The mountains rose up before her like the teeth of some primordial beast, ready to devour anything foolish enough to enter their domain. As Cassandra approached the target area, her radar warning receiver began painting threats across her heads-up display like a deadly constellation. 3 separate SAM sites had locked onto her aircraft, their tracking radars illuminating her A-10 with invisible fingers of death. Standard doctrine called for immediate evasive action, chaff deployment, and withdrawal to a safer engagement distance. Standard doctrine didn't account for a SEAL team fighting for their lives in a canyon, barely wide enough for her aircraft's wingspan. Neptune 6-1, I'm picking up multiple SAM locks. Can you give me direction to the nearest threat? Her voice remained calm, professional, but inside her chest, her heart was performing aerobatics that would have impressed the Thunderbirds. Rodriguez's response came back over the sound of intensifying gunfire. Hog 1-7, SAM site bearing 285 degrees from our position, approximately 800 meters up the ridgeline. They've got a clear shot at anything coming through the valley. Cassandra banked her aircraft into a steep turn, dropping altitude as she lined up for her attack run. Through her night vision, she could see muzzle flashes dotting the mountainside like angry fireflies. The enemy had chosen their position well, high ground with overlapping fields of fire, natural cover from the rocky terrain, and multiple escape routes through the labyrinthine canyon system. But they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd assumed that American air power would follow conventional tactics, staying at safe altitudes while delivering ordnance from a distance. They hadn't counted on a pilot crazy enough to drop down into the canyon itself, using the terrain that protected them as a highway straight into their midst. Neptune 6-1, I'm beginning my attack run. Keep your heads down, this is going to get loud. Cassandra pushed her throttles forward, diving toward the canyon floor at an angle that would have made her flight instructors reach for their parachutes. The A-10's titanium bathtub of armor around her cockpit was designed to withstand direct hits from 23 cannon fire, but at this altitude and speed, Even small arms fire could find vulnerable spots. The GAU-8 cannon beneath her aircraft was a weapon of terrible beauty, capable of firing 3,900 rounds per minute of tank-killing ammunition. Each depleted uranium shell was designed to penetrate armor, but against personnel in the open, the effect was devastating. As she lined up her first target, a cluster of muzzle flashes near what appeared to be a heavy machine gun position, Cassandra felt the familiar weight of responsibility settle across her shoulders. These weren't just targets on a screen. These were human beings about to die because they'd chosen to threaten American servicemen. The mathematics of combat were brutal and simple, but that didn't make them easy to live with. The first burst from her cannon lit up the night like a laser from hell. 30mm rounds hammered into the mountainside at 4,200 feet per second, each impact creating a crater the size of a dinner plate. The enemy machine gun position simply ceased to exist, vaporized in a shower of rock and steel that painted the surrounding cliff face with shadows and flame. But the return fire was immediate and overwhelming. Tracer rounds streaked past her canopy like angry comets, and the distinctive smoke trail of a shoulder-fired missile corkscrewed through the air barely 50 feet off her port wing. The enemy had discipline, training, and enough firepower to turn the canyon into a shooting gallery with her A-10 as the primary target. Neptune 6-1, I'm taking heavy fire but continuing the attack. Can you identify the largest concentration of enemy forces? Cassandra pulled up hard, climbing rapidly while deploying chaff and flares to confuse any missiles that might be tracking her heat signature. Rodriguez's voice came back strained but grateful. Hog 1-7, you just took out their primary firing position. Enemy forces are concentrated in 3 groups, 270 degrees, 320 degrees, and 045 degrees from our position. Estimate 60 to 80 fighters per group. 3 separate enemy positions, each heavily fortified, each with clear fields of fire into the canyon where Neptune 6-1 was trapped. Standard close air support doctrine called for systematic elimination of threats, starting with the most dangerous and working down the priority list. But standard doctrine assumed time, fuel, and the luxury of multiple attack runs. Cassandra checked her fuel gauge. Enough for maybe 3 more attack runs before she'd need to break off for aerial refueling. 3 runs against 3 fortified positions, with each attack bringing her deeper into a canyon that offered no room for error and no mercy for miscalculation. The radio crackled again, but this time it wasn't Rodriguez. Hog 1-7, this is Overlord. Be advised, satellite reconnaissance shows enemy reinforcements moving toward your position from the north. Estimate additional 150 fighters, arrival time approximately 15 minutes. Cassandra felt her blood turn to ice water. 350 enemy fighters, in terrain that channeled every attack into a killing zone, with reinforcements coming and fuel running low. The mathematics of survival had just shifted dramatically in favor of the enemy. But Neptune 6-1 was still down there, still fighting, still counting on her to level the playing field. She rolled into her second attack run, diving toward the canyon floor with the intensity of a falling star. This time, she was heading straight for the largest enemy concentration. 80 fighters dug into positions that had probably taken them hours to prepare. Positions they thought were impregnable. They were about to learn why the A-10 Thunderbolt II was nicknamed the Warthog. The second attack run was different from the first. Instead of the surgical precision she'd used against the machine gun nest, Cassandra came in low and fast. Her aircraft's nose pointed directly at the heart of the enemy formation like a guided missile made of titanium and rage. The GAU-8 cannon beneath her aircraft began its distinctive growl, a sound that had earned it the nickname, the Devil's Chainsaw, among ground forces who'd heard it in action. For 7 seconds, she held the trigger down, sending 455 rounds of depleted uranium death streaming into the mountainside at a rate that defied comprehension. Each shell was designed to penetrate tank armor, but against personnel in the open, the effect was apocalyptic. Rocky outcroppings exploded into clouds of shrapnel, firing positions simply disintegrated, and the careful defensive formation that had taken the enemy hours to establish was erased in less than 10 seconds of concentrated firepower. But the canyon walls amplified the sound of her engines, turning her approach into a thunderclap that announced her presence to every enemy fighter within 10 miles. By the time she pulled up from her attack run, the entire mountainside was alive with muzzle flashes and the telltale smoke trails of surface-to-air missiles. Hog 17, Splash 1 SAM site. Rodriguez's voice carried a note of desperate hope. You just turned that hillside into a parking lot, but be advised, we're seeing movement in the northern approaches. Those reinforcements are early. Cassandra banked hard to the right, pulling G-forces that pressed her deep into her ejection seat as she climbed above the canyon rim. Her radar warning receiver was screaming constantly now, painting threat symbols across her display faster than she could process them. The enemy had revealed their hand. This wasn't just an ambush. It was a carefully orchestrated trap designed to bring down American air assets. Neptune 6-1, I need exact coordinates on your position. I'm going to try something that'll either get us all killed or get you out of there. Cassandra's voice carried a grim determination that surprised even her. She just made a decision that went against every tactical manual ever written, but sometimes survival demanded innovation. The coordinates came back immediately. Rodriguez had obviously been anticipating this request. As Cassandra plotted the position on her navigation system, she realized that Neptune 6-1 was trapped in what amounted to a natural amphitheater, with steep walls on 3 sides and the only exit blocked by the third enemy position. Conventional close air support would require multiple attack runs against each position, giving the enemy time to adjust their tactics and the incoming reinforcements time to arrive. But there was another option, one that would either end this fight in 30 seconds or end her career in a ball of flame. Neptune 6-1, in 60 seconds I'm going to turn that canyon into the loudest place on Earth. When I say go, you move toward the eastern exit as fast as you can. Don't stop, don't look back, and don't worry about covering fire. I'll be providing all the covering fire you need. The plan was insane by any rational measure. Instead of the systematic elimination of enemy positions, Cassandra was going to dive straight down into the canyon and follow its floor at altitude so low that her landing gear would nearly scrape the rocks. At that height, she'd be below the optimal engagement envelope of the surface-to-air missiles, but she'd also be flying through a concentrated crossfire from 300 enemy fighters with nowhere to run and nowhere to hide. The A-10 had been designed for exactly this kind of mission, close air support in the most dangerous possible conditions, but it had never been tested in terrain this restrictive against odds this overwhelming. She was about to find out if 40 years of engineering and her own 4 years of intensive training were enough to beat simple mathematics and superior numbers. As she rolled into the steepest dive of her career, Cassandra caught a glimpse of her reflection in the canopy glass. Her pale green eyes were steady, her jaw set with determination, but there was something else there, a kind of fierce joy that came from finally being able to prove what she'd always known about herself. She wasn't just competent, she was exceptional, and tonight that distinction was going to mean the difference between life and death for 8 American warriors trapped in hell. The canyon walls blurred past her wingtips as she dropped below the ridgeline, entering a world of rock and shadow where the margin for error was measured in heartbeats. At this altitude, flying at over 400 miles per hour, even the slightest miscalculation would turn her aircraft into a fireball that would be visible from orbit. But it also meant she was now hunting her enemies on their own ground, in terrain they thought made them invulnerable. The third attack run began with Cassandra flying inverted, rolled completely upside down as she navigated a twist in the canyon that would have been impossible to negotiate in normal flight attitude. The blood rushed to her head, her instrument spun wildly, and for a moment that felt like eternity, she was flying blind through a corridor of stone that offered no forgiveness for mistakes. When she rolled level again, she was less than 100 feet above the canyon floor, flying directly toward the eastern enemy position at a speed that turned the landscape into a blur of rock and shadow. Her targeting system locked onto multiple heat signatures. Enemy fighters who suddenly realized that the American air support wasn't staying at a safe distance, wasn't following the rules they'd planned for. The GAU-8 cannon spoke again, but this time Cassandra didn't limit herself to short, controlled bursts. She held the trigger down for a full 15-second engagement, cycling through nearly 1,000 rounds of ammunition as she flew the length of the enemy position at point-blank range. The sound was indescribable, like the world's largest zipper being opened by an angry god. Rock faces exploded into clouds of dust and shrapnel. Carefully prepared fighting positions disintegrated under the impact of shells designed to destroy main battle tanks. Men who'd spent their lives preparing for war discovered what it meant to face the full fury of American air power delivered with surgical precision and unstoppable force. But the canyon walls that had protected her from surface-to-air missiles also trapped her in a concentrated crossfire from the remaining enemy forces. Small arms fire sparked off her armored cockpit, rifle rounds designed to penetrate body armor, but utterly inadequate against titanium plating that could stop 23 cannon shells. Still, at this range and speed, volume of fire could accomplish what individual accuracy could not. Cassandra felt her aircraft shudder as several rounds found their mark on non-critical systems. Warning lights illuminated her instrument panel like a Christmas tree, indicating damage to her hydraulic system, electrical connections, and fuel lines. The A-10 had been built to absorb punishment, but it wasn't invincible. "Neptune 6-1, go, go, go," she shouted into her radio as she climbed rapidly out of the canyon, trailing smoke from her port engine but still flying. Behind her, the eastern enemy position had been reduced to scattered craters and drifting smoke, the exit route cleared for the SEAL team's extraction. But her fuel gauge was now reading critically low, and those enemy reinforcements were less than 5 minutes out. She'd accomplished the impossible, but the fight wasn't over yet. Rodriguez's voice crackled over the radio, hoarse with exhaustion but alive with hope. "Hog 17, Neptune 6-1 is mobile and moving toward the extraction point. You magnificent, crazy pilot. I don't know how you just did that, but you saved our lives." Cassandra allowed herself a brief smile as she assessed her aircraft's condition. The port engine was running rough but stable, hydraulic pressure was holding steady despite multiple hits, and her weapon systems were still operational. The A-10 was living up to its reputation as the most survivable aircraft ever built, designed by engineers who understood that close air support meant flying into hell and coming back to tell about it. But the tactical situation was far from resolved. Satellite reconnaissance was now showing the enemy reinforcements moving at double time toward the canyon, apparently aware that their carefully planned ambush had gone sideways. These weren't random insurgents. This was a coordinated military operation with backup plans and contingency protocols. "Overlord, this is Hog 17. Neptune 6-1 is mobile and moving toward extraction, but I'm showing enemy reinforcements converging on the canyon from multiple directions. Request immediate support for extraction protocol." Cassandra's voice was steady, professional, but inside she was calculating fuel consumption rates, ammunition expenditure, and the rapidly shrinking window for a successful extraction. The response from Overlord came back immediately, but it wasn't what she'd hoped to hear. "Hog 17, negative on additional air support. You're the only asset in range, and extraction birds are still 20 minutes out. Hold position and provide cover for Neptune 6-1 until they reach the landing zone." 20 minutes, with fuel for maybe 2 more attack runs, against an enemy force that was now approaching company strength, spread across multiple approach routes, and undoubtedly furious about the devastating casualties they just absorbed. The mathematics of survival had shifted again, and this time the numbers looked impossible. But impossible was just another word for Tuesday in the life of a close air support pilot. Cassandra had signed up for this job knowing that someday she might be called upon to hold the line against overwhelming odds, to stand between American servicemen and certain death with nothing but skill, courage, and the most powerful close air support aircraft ever built. Today was that day. The question wasn't whether she could hold for 20 minutes against superior numbers and rapidly diminishing resources. The question was whether she would. The answer came without hesitation, carried in her voice as she responded to Overlord with the calm professionalism that had earned her the call sign Reaper. Copy, Overlord. Hog 17 will provide cover until extraction is complete. You can count on it. In the distance, she could see dust clouds rising from the northern approaches as the enemy reinforcements moved into position. 3 groups of 50 fighters each, all converging on the canyon where Neptune 6-1 was fighting their way toward salvation. The trap that had been sprung on the SEAL team was about to be turned inside out, with Cassandra as the pivot point between success and catastrophe. She checked her weapons loadout one final time. 174 rounds remaining for the GAU-8 cannon, 4 AGM-65 Maverick missiles, and enough fuel for perhaps 30 more minutes of flight time. Not much to work with against 150 enemy fighters, but it would have to be enough. The radio crackled with Rodriguez's voice, now coming from a different position as Neptune 6-1 fought their way through the canyon toward the extraction point. Hog 17, we're seeing enemy movement on the northern ridge. Looks like at least 50 fighters moving to cut off our escape route. Cassandra rolled into a banking turn, lining up for her 4th attack run of the night. Her aircraft was damaged, her fuel was low, and she was about to engage an enemy force that outnumbered her by odds that made this fight mathematically unwinnable. But mathematics didn't account for the intangible factors: skill, determination, and the absolute refusal to let American servicemen die on her watch. As she dove toward the northern ridge, Cassandra felt a strange calm settle over her. This was the moment she'd trained for her entire career, the test that would define not just her legacy but her character. Win or lose, live or die, she was exactly where she was supposed to be, doing exactly what she'd been born to do. The 4th attack run was different from the first 3. This time, Cassandra wasn't just providing close air support. She was conducting a symphony of destruction designed to break the enemy's will as thoroughly as it broke their formations. She came in low and fast, using the terrain to mask her approach until the last possible moment, then climbed rapidly while launching 2 Maverick missiles at the center of the enemy formation. The missiles struck with devastating precision, each one eliminating a cluster of fighters and creating chaos in the carefully organized advance. But instead of pulling away after the missile launch, Cassandra rolled into a steep dive, bringing her cannon to bear on the scattered survivors who were now exposed and disorganized. The GAU-8 spoke with its distinctive voice, sending the last of her depleted uranium ammunition streaming into enemy positions that had nowhere to hide. For the 4th time that night, she turned a mountainside into a moonscape, using firepower and precision to accomplish what an entire infantry company might have struggled to achieve. But this time, the return fire was more organized, more desperate, and more dangerous. The surviving enemy fighters had learned from the previous attacks, spreading their positions to minimize casualties from area effect weapons and concentrating their fire on the most likely attack routes. Small arms fire filled the air like deadly snowflakes, and she counted at least 2 more surface-to-air missile launches during her attack run. One of the missiles passed close enough to her aircraft that she could feel the heat wash through her canopy. Her radar warning receiver was screaming continuously now, painting threat symbols across her heads-up display faster than her eyes could track them. The enemy had revealed their full strength, and it was more than intelligence estimates had suggested. Neptune 6-1, sitrep, she called as she climbed away from the northern ridge, trailing smoke from multiple hits but still flying. Rodriguez's response came back immediately. Hog 1-7, you just cleared our northern approach, but we're seeing movement on the eastern and southern ridges now. They're trying to box us in before extraction arrives. Cassandra checked her fuel gauge again. 15 minutes of flight time remaining, maybe less if she had to maneuver aggressively. 2 Maverick missiles left, no cannon ammunition, and an enemy force that was still estimated at over 100 fighters spread across multiple positions. The tactical situation had evolved from desperate to impossible, but Neptune 6-1 was still counting on her to hold the line. She was going to need a miracle, or she was going to have to become one. The decision came to her with sudden clarity, born from 4 years of intensive training and 18 months of frustration at being underestimated. She'd proven her competence, demonstrated her skill, and earned the respect of the warriors she'd saved. Now it was time to show them what legend looked like. Overlord, this is Hog 1-7. I'm going to need you to clear me a direct path to the extraction point. Neptune 6-1 is going to walk out of there, but they're going to need cover fire that breaks every rule in the book. The plan that formed in her mind was beyond dangerous. It was borderline suicidal, but it was also their only chance of getting 8 American warriors home alive. She was going to turn her damaged A-10 into a flying artillery platform, using her remaining missiles and the aircraft itself as weapons in a final gambit that would either end the fight or end her career in a ball of flame. As she lined up for what would almost certainly be her final attack run, Cassandra thought about the call sign that had defined her career. Reaper, the harvester of souls, the angel of death, the final word in any argument involving enemy forces and American lives. Tonight, she was going to earn that name in a way that would be remembered long after the last shots were fired. The extraction helicopters were still 10 minutes out, but 10 minutes might as well have been 10 hours given the tactical situation. Enemy forces were converging on the canyon from 3 directions. Neptune 6-1 was running low on ammunition, and her own aircraft was damaged beyond what any reasonable pilot would consider flyable. But Cassandra Volkov had never been accused of being reasonable. The final attack run began with Cassandra flying lower than she'd ever flown before, skimming the canyon walls at an altitude that left no margin for error and no room for doubt. Her remaining 2 Maverick missiles were locked onto the largest concentrations of enemy fighters, positions that offered the greatest threat to Neptune 6-1's escape route. But this time, instead of launching the missiles and climbing away to safety, she was going to follow them in, using her aircraft as a psychological weapon that would break enemy morale as effectively as her ordnance broke their positions. The sight of an A-10 Thunderbolt II diving directly toward them at full throttle, trailing smoke and fire like an avenging angel, would either scatter them in terror or freeze them in shock. Either way, it would give Neptune 6-1 the opening they needed. Neptune 6-1, in 30 seconds the eastern approach is going to get very loud. When you hear my engines overhead, move fast and don't look back. Extraction birds will be at your position in 8 minutes. Cassandra's voice carried a finality that spoke of decisions made and lines crossed, of bridges burned and legends born. Rodriguez's response was immediate and heartfelt. Hog 1-7, whatever you're about to do, know that Neptune 6-1 will never forget what you've done here tonight. You saved our lives, and we owe you everything. Cassandra smiled grimly as she armed her final 2 missiles, checking their targeting systems one last time before committing to an attack run that would either save 8 American lives or add her name to the long list of pilots who died trying. The mathematics of survival had become irrelevant. This was no longer about tactics or strategy or reasonable risk assessment. This was about honor, about keeping faith with warriors who'd placed their lives in her hands, about proving that competence had nothing to do with gender and everything to do with courage, skill, and the willingness to pay whatever price victory demanded. The missiles launched simultaneously, streaking through the night air like falling stars as they tracked toward their targets. Behind them, trailing smoke and flying lower than any sane pilot would attempt, came Cassandra Volkov in an aircraft that had already absorbed more damage than most pilots would fly home with. But she wasn't flying home. Not yet. First, she had to finish what she'd started, complete the mission that had begun with a desperate radio call and evolved into the defining moment of her career. The eastern enemy position loomed ahead like a fortress of stone and steel, bristling with weapons and defended by fighters who'd already learned to respect the deadly accuracy of American air power. They were about to learn what happened when that air power was delivered by a pilot who decided that 8 American lives were worth more than any consideration of personal safety or career survival. The explosions from her Maverick missiles lit up the canyon walls like sunrise as Cassandra followed them in at an altitude so low she could see individual enemy fighters diving for cover. Her engines roared with a sound that echoed off the stone walls like thunder, announcing her presence to every living thing within miles and transforming the night into a symphony of destruction and deliverance. For 27 minutes, she'd held the line against impossible odds. Now it was time to finish the job. The final moments of the engagement unfolded with a clarity that seemed to slow time itself. Cassandra watched her Maverick missiles impact their targets in brilliant flashes that turned night into day, saw enemy positions disintegrate under the focused fury of American ordnance, and felt her aircraft shudder as the shock waves from the explosions buffeted her damaged systems. But instead of pulling up and climbing to safety, she pushed her throttles to full military power and dove deeper into the canyon, flying directly over the remnants of the eastern enemy position at an altitude that allowed her to see the faces of the surviving fighters as they looked up in shock and terror at the smoking warplane passing overhead like a vision from their darkest nightmares. The psychological effect was immediate and overwhelming. Enemy fighters who'd spent the night in carefully prepared positions, confident in their numbers and their tactical advantage, suddenly broke and ran as the reality of their situation became clear. They weren't fighting a distant enemy dropping bombs from safe altitudes. They were facing a pilot willing to fly directly into their midst, to hunt them on their own ground with a ferocity that defied rational explanation. Neptune 6-1, Eastern approach is clear. Move now. Cassandra's voice cut through the radio static as she climbed rapidly away from the canyon floor, her damaged engines protesting but still delivering power. Rodriguez's response came back over the sound of rapid movement and suppressed excitement. Hog 17, Neptune 6-1 is moving. We can see the extraction birds on approach. You did it. You actually did it. But the fight wasn't over yet. Intelligence reports were showing scattered enemy groups still moving toward the extraction point, and satellite reconnaissance had identified at least one heavy weapons team that hadn't been engaged during the previous attacks. With Neptune 6-1 now in the open and moving toward the landing zone, they were vulnerable to long-range fire from enemy positions that had remained hidden during the main engagement. Cassandra checked her system's status one final time. Fuel for perhaps 5 more minutes of flight time. No missiles remaining. No cannon ammunition. Her aircraft was a flying wreck held together by titanium armor and the skill of engineers who designed it to bring pilots home even after absorbing catastrophic damage. But she still had one weapon left, the aircraft itself. And sometimes, the most effective weapon was simply the presence of American air power. The knowledge that someone was watching over friendly forces with the skill and determination to intervene when needed. Overlord, this is Hog 17. Neptune 6-1 is moving toward extraction. but I'm showing possible enemy activity on the southern ridge. Request permission to conduct reconnaissance by fire. The military euphemism was precise and professional, but what she was really asking for was permission to use her remaining fuel and her damaged aircraft to ensure that no enemy fighters were in position to interfere with the extraction. The response came back immediately. Hog 17, you are cleared for reconnaissance by fire. Be advised, your fuel state is critical. Recommend immediate RTB after extraction is complete. Return to base. The three words every pilot wanted to hear at the end of a mission, the promise that the job was done and it was time to go home. But first, she had to make sure that Neptune 6-1 made it to their extraction point without interference from enemy forces that might still be positioned to threaten the operation. The final flyover was different from her attack runs. This time, Cassandra wasn't hunting specific targets or engaging identified threats. She was conducting a presence patrol, using the sight and sound of her aircraft to suppress any enemy activity through the simple knowledge that American air power was overhead and ready to respond to any hostile action. As she flew low over the southern ridge, her engines echoing off the canyon walls like rolling thunder, she could see the extraction helicopters approaching from the east, two A-60 Black Hawks flying in formation, their crews undoubtedly aware that they were entering a combat zone where a single pilot had been holding off superior enemy forces for over half an hour. Below her, Neptune 6-1 was moving rapidly across open ground toward the designated landing zone. 8 elite warriors who'd survived an expertly planned ambush, thanks to the intervention of a pilot they'd probably never see face to face, but would remember for the rest of their